Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. Welcome to episode 221 of the podcast for April 8th, 2015. My guest today is Jacob Stoller. He's the author of a book that was just released. It's titled The Lean CEO, Leading the Way to World-Class Excellence. And the book is available now through Amazon. It was supposed to be released on Friday, but it's actually available and shipping early. It's shipping now. As Jacob explains here in the podcast, he's a journalist, not a lean practitioner, and he interviewed many CEOs across different industries to get their thoughts on lean management, which are captured and summarized really well in a really engaging way in his book. I was fortunate to be able to read a preview copy of it. In the podcast here, we're going to discuss topics including how CEOs get exposed to lean thinking and why more CEOs don't embrace lean, why humility is so important among other beliefs and principles that are consistent among lean CEOs. What does respect for people mean in this lean context? Did Six Sigma and Dr. W. Edwards Deming come up in his interviews? And you're also going to hear a bit about Bob Brody, the CEO at Franciscan St. Francis Health, which was, of course, featured prominently in the Healthcare Kaizen books that Joe Schwartz and I did. And as a quick aside about that, if you'd like to learn more about visiting Franciscan, a special workshop Joe and I are putting together April 22nd and 23rd, please visit the post for this episode, leanblog.org/221, and you'll see a link about how to learn more about that. You'll see a link to Jacob's bio and blog and other great resources related to this book. So again, I want to thank you for listening. If you'd like to subscribe to the podcast, go to leancast.org for more information. Well, again, our guest today is Jacob Stoller. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be here, Mark.
Well, I'm excited about the upcoming book, The Lean CEO. I was wondering if you could tell the listeners about your own background personally and professionally, and also kind of talk about what led to you writing this book.
Okay, sure, Mark. Well, I'm unlike a lot of people that I think you talk to. I am not a lean practitioner. I like to think of myself as a journalist and facilitator. Mm-hmm. And most of my work has been around connecting experts with outsiders. So I've worked a lot with IT. I've worked with accounting, engineering, and more recently, in the last few years, been doing a lot of work with lean. So my interest really in the lean CEO is kind of twofold. I know that CEO involvement is a big part of the conversation in the lean community, and I know there's a lot of questions and anxieties about that. But I'm also interested in the CEO as a sort of in that communicator role, because when you think about it, the CEO is kind of the end of the line. That's the person that's going to have to explain lean to shareholders and perhaps unions and other groups. In other words, if you do go lean all the way at an enterprise level, there's going to have to be somebody that really does have to communicate that very, very well. So I was interested in CEOs and in that particular role, and maybe having CEOs as spokespeople who could maybe explain lean in a kind of a generic way that people outside the lean community could understand.
When you talk to different CEOs, I'm curious, was there a fairly consistent way that they would define lean, or did you find variation in that?
It's interesting. I found a lot of variation. I think people define lean in the way they come to it. People came to lean with different problems. And I think they were comfortable taking lean in a particular direction that suited their company. Mm-hmm. So I think you've got lots of different kinds of ideas about how lean is defined. That said, I think there's some pretty strong beliefs that they shared and which brought them to lean. I think the respect for people is certainly very, very universal. I think in general, these people believe that if you trust employees and if you really believe in them, they're going to come through.
Well, and that's encouraging to hear that the notions of culture and respect for people came to the forefront, because I might expect a CEO to think about and talk about things like cash flow and inventory turns and some of just the hard measures. But it sounds like, and I'm curious to hear maybe is if you can expand on some of that, what the CEOs thought about lean culture. Who were some of the CEOs that you talked to, and from what types of industries?
Okay, gosh. Well, as there were several in healthcare, and I know you know some of these very well and have written about them as well. But when you talk about John Toussaint or Gary Kaplan or Bob Brody, I mean, they have very specific ideas about culture. Talking about the physician-centric culture that exists in medicine, and the need to sort of break that down into a more collaborative model. So there's a particular idea, I guess, that's very important to them. But then you go across different industries, and you get early examples, like somebody like Art Byrne, who a lot of faith in people's sort of innate sense out there on the shop floor, of what needs to be done, and this incredible trust from day one. Go ahead, make a hole in that wall if you need to, So a lot of variety again, in the types of culture that you needed to create in the organization. But it all tends to be quite collaborative and very trusting.
Yeah, and maybe we can come back. I'd like to ask you a little bit more about Bob Brody later, because I think listeners will know John Toussaint from ThedaCare, Gary Kaplan from Virginia Mason. Bob Brody is the CEO at Franciscan St. Francis Health System in Indianapolis. My co-author Joe Schwartz, co-author from Healthcare Kaizen series, works there at Franciscan. So I'm really happy that you were able to talk to Bob and share some of their story in the book. So maybe we can come back to that a little bit later.
Okay.
So one thing you write about in the book is how lean, and I would agree with this, is that lean is a different way of thinking. And I'm curious if you can talk about some of the initial exposures to lean. There's a lot about lean that really contradicts what's taught in business school, and I say this with an MBA hanging on the wall here. But there's a lot of MBAs thinking that or methods that are taught that run counter to lean. Did CEOs tend to hear about it from other CEOs, from their boards, from customers?
Well, I think first of all, the MBA thinking is. I think there is, and you'll probably agree with me, Mark, but a kind of a healthy skepticism about what's taught in business school. I've worked with different groups outside of the lean community, like accounting groups and stuff like that. And sometimes people roll their eyes when they talk about, what's actually taught in school. Mm-hmm. Said, you have to get out there into the workplace to really understand a lot of the stuff that goes on. So I think it's not that difficult for a lot of these people to get beyond that. Mm-hmm. But having said that, I think it's, the conventional business thinking isn't just what's taught in business school. I mean, I think there's a lot of what people call business common sense or business conventional wisdom, which also I think is questioned by lean. Mm-hmm. For example, there's a classic idea that you can have quality, price, and delivery. Those are three things, and you can only get two out of those three.
Right. Sometimes only one, but definitely not all three. Yeah. Right.
There's a kind of a rule of thumb that you have to sacrifice one of those, right? I mean, that's just people love to say things like that, or you look at some of the examples in the book too. Someone like Arians, where one of the most challenging things in their lean transformation was getting people to make things slowly, right?
Yeah.
Like he's got a whole technology group in there that works on slowing machines down, and that's very, very difficult for a lot of people that have been in the shop floor and been working in lean organizations for a long time. So I would say the conventional thinking is it's not just what's taught in school, but it's also what people have gotten used to. So I think the CEOs, though, they do have some very strong, there's some, I think somehow lean speaks to a lot of people. It's somehow it was in the back of their minds, however they came to it. As you know, some of the healthcare people actually went shopping for a different operating system. In some cases, they picked it up along the way, and then they became CEO and they saw it. So there've been just different kinds of exposure. But I think the real challenge is not so much the CEO realizing it, but the CEO bringing it to the whole organization.
Yeah.
And that's again, because of all these things that the CEO has to change. I mean, we can set up a line to create flow, but if you want to build a whole company around lean, I mean, you have to change comp plans, reporting structures, accounting mechanisms, and that's a lot to put on the CEO.
Yeah, and there's more involved than and when you talk about slowing down the equipment, the idea I'm guessing, or the stories you heard, we're talking about matching production to the rate of customer demand.
That's right.
And not trying to overproduce and do things that kind of traditional accounting would tell you reduces costs and people challenge that. But it's also about looking at the whole enterprise and making sure we're building products or creating services that solve real customer needs, and understanding those customers and interacting with a wide range of functions and customers and suppliers that goes well beyond the shop floor, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. And of course, one wonderful place you see this is when you're looking at the startups, right? And here you have one of the CEOs talking about, you can improve any process 10%, he said. And this is the guy from a company called E-Leather in the UK, his name is Chris McBean. What he said is, we can improve a process by 10%, any kind of process in the business, but how do we decide whether that process has value or not?
Right.
Should
you be doing it? Yeah.
He said, if you're in a startup and your process doesn't have any value, at the end of the year, you're going to be dead.
Yeah.
So he sees lean in a very different kind of way, very, very strategic. We're looking at what we're doing and is this going to work?
Yeah. So I'm curious, as we kind of delve into kind of personal ways of thinking, leadership, starts, I guess with any of us looking in the mirror and what do we believe? How do we act? One of the things that, that comes through in stories in the book is, a high degree of humility that a lot of these CEOs have. And, a lot of the lean CEOs that I've met have that trait. There's one of my favorite books that's sitting here is a book called Toyota by Toyota, which is written by a number of leaders and associates, team members at the Toyota Georgetown plant. And the first chapter is about nothing but humility, leading with humility. And I'm curious, kind of what some of your observations or reflections were about that humility and those leaders and what that translated to.
Sure. Okay. Well, I've not read Toyota by Toyota, so I would love to read it. It sounds like a great book. On humility, I think we have to be careful how we define that, and because I think there's a tendency out there to talk about leaders in terms of their personalities, and I think the kind of humility I saw is really more about beliefs that they have, and I think there's a very essential thing, and this is certainly you see this with Deming, this idea that we don't know what we don't know, and the kind of a scientific intellectual humility perhaps, where you go out on the floor and like Taiichi Ohno, you say, well, there's a 50% chance that what my hunch about the way this thing is, what's going on here, is wrong. So I think there's a kind of humility there. willingness to learn, willingness to listen. I think definitely I saw that in the CEOs. In terms of style of personalities, well, I don't know. I think they're very, very different. If you analyze whether these CEOs are ask assertive or tell assertive, or whether they're sort of people types or more concept types. I mean, I think if you look at the book, you'll see they're in every quadrant. There are different kinds of people, but I think these fundamental beliefs maybe define the kind of humility that I think really is relevant.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned about learning and listening. I've got a copy of the Industrial Engineer magazine that comes from the Institute of Industrial Engineers from a few years back. And I don't keep every issue, but I kept this one because, on the spine of the magazine, they tend to have these little, phrases that summarize what's in that issue and what's the key story. And it just says on the spine, it says, CEO learns, listens. And that was apparently very newsworthy.
Oh, okay.
And it that it shouldn't be that way. And obviously, there are a lot of really good CEOs who do learn and realize if we're going to create a learning organization, that learning and that curiosity starts with them, right?
Yeah, and that's interesting. That's an interesting when you see a piece like that, because I think sometimes expectations of CEOs are pretty low. I mean, we celebrate the fact that some CEO has wonderful integrity because they don't play factions against each other and they don't have self-serving comp plans and stuff like that. But it seems to me a lot of those things are table stakes. I mean, if you're a leader, you got to be a decent, straightforward person. And I would certainly say that every one of the CEOs in the book would pass that test. I mean, I think they're basic, decent people who don't lie and cheat.
Now, when we talk about foundations like that, integrity, humility, having respect for people. I mean, maybe I'm being a cynic, but I'd be surprised if anybody ever gets more humble through their career. That maybe is it just that some people have managed to maybe they just have a strength of character that things don't go to their head, or as they rise through the ranks, and a lot of times CEOs have been promoted and rewarded, and it's been reinforced over 20, 25, 30 years of their career how great they are. But I guess the question is how much of this is just innate and it hasn't been chipped away at versus people or CEOs who had stories about how did they have an epiphany and realize that they needed to change their stripes in some way.
I think you'll see definitely some epiphanies in the book. I mean, I think certainly someone like Robert Chapman is quite dramatic. He was really quite troubled by the kind of workplace that he saw in the companies that he had and in the companies that he was taking over. Was quite troubled by it. So that I think he probably changed quite a bit as a result of that.
And what company or industry was
that's Barry Waymiller.
Yes. Yeah.
And of course he built a whole operating system, if you will, around the people-centric leadership. And John, I don't know him, but I know John Toussaint really well, and John always tells stories very openly. He does
about how it's not like he was always magically this quote unquote lean leader, that he had people challenge him, and that he tried to learn some new habits and shift some of his own behaviors between executive behavior. He often labels it white coat behavior, but he's quick to point out it's not just physician leaders who have these either kind of autocratic or blaming or impatient tendencies. It's non-clinical executives in healthcare as well. So I think John, I guess maybe that's an example of humility, that he's willing to share those examples of not knowing everything, of not being perfect, right?
Sure, and I think he points out in the book, and I'm sure in your books as well, that he did run with lean ideas for several years before he really realized that there had to be a fundamental shift in the way they managed the company. So managed, the healthcare organization. So I think there was a kind of an epiphany of having to dig deeper at a certain point in his journey.
Yeah. Now, in your interviews with the CEOs, I'm curious if Dr. Deming came up in the discussion with any of these leaders, if they had learned from him directly or through his books, or did they find his philosophy and approach to be helpful or complementary to Lean?
Interesting. I'd say for the most part, no. Now, Bob Brody is a big exception because I think he was part of some of these Deming discussion groups that were going on in the 90s. And also, there were some government people I talked to that did not get in the book that also had sort of Lean, or sort of not Lean, but, Deming type discussions. I didn't, I generally let people bring things up. And some people, that was not one of the things that really rose to the surface.
Go ahead.
But that said, I think when you look at the ideas of Deming, they certainly are very, very present. Things like drive out fear. Certainly the constancy of purpose is absolutely essential, I think, for these CEOs. They just have to have that.
I'm curious. The book's called the Lean CEO. I'm curious if Six Sigma came up in the discussion with some of these organizations. Are they combining methodologies, or I'm curious if that came up at all.
It didn't come up, and I was a little bit surprised. I was expecting people to bring it up more often, but again, I didn't go digging for Six Sigma. I didn't ask the CEOs, did you do this? Did you do that? I tried a more open approach to interviewing and trying to get them to share sort of the most important parts of their journey and how things looked from their perspective. So I didn't prompt them on that, but and so no, it wasn't really brought up.
Okay. So I mean, you spent a lot of time talking to CEOs who, in a broad sense, get it, and I'm curious what their thoughts were, or if you had any conclusions about CEOs that are still not even aware of Lean, or not trying to become a Lean culture or a Lean organization. Do they have any thoughts about what some of the barriers are, or what's getting in the way of maybe kind of broader adoption amongst CEOs?
To be honest, Mark, I know a lot of people in the Lean community are scratching their heads over that one, and the Lean CEOs were sort of the same. I mean, I think I did ask, in a lot of cases, why do you think more people don't do this? And the answer would be, I'm not sure, or I don't know. Ignorance was cited as one sort of thing. I'd say maybe a lot of people just don't know about it or don't understand it yet. But I think also, there are many cases there people talk about having tours where CEOs come to see the plant and they get all excited about Lean, and then nothing happens. So, two examples of this. One is Steve Brenneman, Aluminum Trailer, and the other is Carl Waddenston. And both of these folks do a lot of interacting with people outside the Lean community, bringing new CEOs into their plants. And yet they find that the resistance and the time it takes from I get it to actually doing something is pretty enormous.
Yeah, and I was just going to interject real quick. Listeners of the podcast might know of Carl from Vibeco in Rhode Island. I've had Carl on the show a couple of times before, and he's great about trying to get out within the broader business community and engaging other leaders, and not just kind of talking within Lean navel gazing circles. He's out there bringing a lot more people into this fold, right?
He's very good at that, yeah. And he works with the Young Presidents Association, and he's constantly advocating for Lean within that group. But I think where this leads us is, when we talk about the resistance and the difficulty of implementing Lean with CEOs, is that even some of the most sort of strongest Lean CEOs in the book admitted that they wouldn't have done it if there wasn't some kind of burning platform. So you take, for example, something like Herman Miller. I mean, Brian Walker is really he's the ultimate lean CEO in a lot of ways. He's really very hands-on out there, had all the respect for people and everything. He's a real lean thinker. And yet he says that it took the downturn around the millennium to really get them to go enterprise with lean. And this is after already being recognized by Toyota as one of the sort of model sites for outside of the automotive industry. So for him to say, if it hadn't been for this financial crisis, we never would have reset people's thinking the way we did. So that's not not encouraging, Mark. I know, but I think you see a number of burning platforms in the book, of various degrees, and that seems to have been fairly universal.
How many of those burning platforms were related to 2009, 2010 financial crisis as opposed to longer lean journeys, did you find?
Well, I think you had those. Those crises often happened in mid-journey. Where the journey was sort of progressing, sort of slowly, but not really happening, and then the crisis actually made it go to the next level where they really went enterprise. But there was about a half a dozen of them or so, I guess, said they were spurred on by financial crisis. There were other things. I think in the case of Herman Miller, it was partly the financial crisis, but they were concerned about growth and having a conservative growth strategy as well, because given all the uncertainty, they didn't want to go building any more factories. So that was sort of behind that. I think startups, there's some pressures there, and there's a chapter on that, actually on learning organizations, which is where I think startups fit in very nicely. There's some very interesting ones. For example, there's a company called PLZ Aeroscience, and the CEO is a gentleman named Ed Basinski, and he was hired as CEO to solve a problem where they had silos. They had two divisions of the company that really weren't talking to each other, and they weren't working together. And so the company really wasn't able to grow. So that was his burning platform. He came in and he used lean, by the way, to solve this problem of two silos and two groups. And then he proceeded to take the company down the lean journey the rest of the way. Not what you would expect.
Yeah. And maybe along the lines of, like I said, not what you expect. I was going to ask you, was there anything in your research that was really surprising, as opposed to any thoughts that you had going in about what you might uncover, or the types of stories or lessons? Was there anything that really jumped out as something unexpected?
I was amazed at the range of problems that people could take on with lean. I was amazed that they talked about it in slightly different terms. A lot of them don't even like to use the term lean. So I saw that diversity, but at the same time, once things get going, the convergence, these companies, as they went through lean, started to look more and more alike, and I just found that fascinating, given the diversity and given the different places where these people were coming from.
That there were consistent principles and consistent themes.
Yeah, consistent. Somehow they became more holistic in the way they approached lean as they progressed, and it's almost like there's a kind of a internal DNA with lean that sort of takes over, and it, I found that really fascinating.
Yeah. Now, I'm sure one thing that would really drive CEOs to pay attention is results, even if hopefully culture and leadership is important. But if we look back over time, Wire Mold, of course, was a great financial success story. I mean, they were acquired, and people may have heard on a past podcast Bob Emiliani talk about how a lot of that kind of fell apart after Art Byrne and company were gone. But Toyota, if you look at comparisons in the automotive industry, Toyota clearly has had incredible long-term success and shareholder value for CEOs who are typically focused on shareholder value. But as Toyota and I think lean thinking emphasizes the focus is on the long term as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to making a quick buck or slashing costs or anything in the short term. So I guess the question that I'm kind of meandering into
Sure,
here,
no,
sorry,
fair.
the question is about results.
Mm-hmm.
How did the CEOs articulate the value that they're creating for the companies, for their shareholders, for their customers? What were some of the hopefully win-win-win type scenarios or data that's hopefully there in the book to say that lean is not just a nice thing to do, that it's a great business strategy.
Well, here's, I guess, Mark, here's where we saw a bit of humility, I guess, in the classic sense, because, I mean, their results, I mean, let's face it, you read the book, the results are spectacular. I mean, these companies are all doing really, really well. But, it's almost, oh, and by the way, we multiplied our revenues by 500%, I mean, it tends to be, the results tend to be part of something much bigger, which is one of the exciting things. But yeah, they did extremely well. I guess when you talk about results, you talk about the fiduciary responsibilities that they have, and yes, they were able to maintain those, and it wasn't a big problem.
And maybe kind of final direction here before we wrap up in a few minutes. I did want to kind of bring the conversation back to healthcare a little bit, and Bob Brody and their story at Franciscan St. Francis, where I've been really impressed that I think they do have a very rare culture of continuous improvement there, and Bob has been a big part of that. I'm curious to hear some of your reflections or any stories about what you talked to Bob about.
Okay, well, I think Bob was somewhat of a contrast to both John and
Gary.
Yeah. The contrast really was that he didn't. I want to say this in the right way, but he didn't push it as hard. I think he was more of a kind of enabling it, letting it evolve.
Mm-hmm.
And he worked obviously, very, very, I guess very closely with Joe on that. But Joe Schwartz, who I know is your co-author. So I saw him more as, and well, in his own words, I think he is more of a, like I say, a much more conciliatory and letting things happen. However, he said towards the end of the interview, I may not be able to be as patient as I've been because things are getting tough in terms of the financial pressures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the way they framed what they've been doing there, it's different than. I think at Theta Care and Virginia Mason, it was a fairly aggressive, lean driven approach. Where my impression of it at Franciscan is that there's been a huge focus on staff engagement and Kaizen, and they do some rapid improvement events, and they train people in Lean Six Sigma. But it's been a little bit different path.
Also, I think what he said, what Bob said, is that they had been, practicing sort of Deming thinking for a long time, long before even before the term lean. So he felt that they had a long history. I don't know how to compare the histories in that respect. Maybe you could shine some light on that. But it sounded to me like maybe there was a slightly longer history of establishing some of those.
Yeah, I think it was a slightly more evolutionary approach, and it's continuing to evolve. And like you said, as they face different pressures and challenges, as all organizations do, I trust they'll continue to evolve and tweak their approach. I think in general in healthcare, there was a lot of exposure that people had to total quality management, and I think a lot of it just completely faded away. Where when I was in Japan back in November, the hospitals there don't really they talk about lean a little bit, And the CEOs there that I met in Japanese hospitals are very engaged, and they're driving quality and they're driving staff engagement, but they never stopped doing TQM. So they'll say, well, we've been doing TQM and quality projects for 20 or 25 years, but now we're traveling to Seattle and we're learning more specific lean methods, and we're doing more rapid cycle improvement instead of these kind of, relatively leisurely 6-month-long projects. And that's just a different approach than some of the hospitals here in the U.S. have taken. So
right.
Always lots of learning back and forth. So
yeah, well, lean is so I guess accommodating to different approaches.
And I think as you found in the book, accommodating to different personalities. That lean is not some sort of cult of personality where we must act like Taiichi Ono did, or we must act like as people tend to do in business. I want to be just like Jack Welch, or I want to be just like Steve Jobs. That there's room for people to, I guess, like you said, within certain boundaries and certain frameworks, for people to adopt and adapt lean within their own style of CEO leadership, right?
Right.
So Jacob, I want to thank you for one, letting me take an early peek at the book, and I know a lot of people out there will be excited to find it. Can you talk a little bit about where people can find you online, book website, release date, just details like that about the book? Well,
it's the website is, I guess, a good hub for that, because it's got the you can click to Amazon based on that. But it's jacobstoller.com. That's my name, JACOBSTOLLER. So I'll be doing some publicity around that, which is going to start to ramp up leading up to the big day on April 10th.
April 10th, and coming from McGraw-Hill, so that'll
from McGraw-Hill.
It'll be very widely available, is the good news, right?
Well, I certainly hope so.
Yeah. But obviously going through a big publisher like McGraw-Hill. And any final thoughts that you would want to share with listeners about the book, or anything else related to what you learned?
Well, I just want to say it's been a wonderful experience writing it, and I've learned an enormous amount, and from people like you along the way, Mark. I think this lean community is really a wonderful group to work with, and I hope you guys keep it up. I mean, keep doing the work you're doing. It's important work. I think it's a lot riding on it in terms of the economy and people's lives and the quality of healthcare and et cetera.
Well, thank you for that reflection, and glad you got to do the project. And again, congratulations on the launch of the book. So again, our guest today has been Jacob Stoller. The book is The Lean CEO. Hope you'll check it out, and maybe we can talk again some other time, Jacob.
Thank you, Mark. I hope so too.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.